From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Erick DeWolf will tell you wheat producers that the time is here for making decisions on applying a foliar fungicide to your stands to fend off leaf and stripe rust damage, as rust disease is likely to intensify in Kansas over the coming days. Then Britton Rucker talks with K-State's Kevin Donnelly and members of the K-State Crops team that just won the National Crops and Precision Agriculture Contests at the North American Colleges and Teachers of Agriculture Judging Conference. Featured our team members Nate Dick, Kaylin Fink, Jayden Meyer, and Luke Ryan. And further ahead, K-State's Charlie Lee looks at a new study of prairie dogs and their impact on grazing forage resources. Right here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome aboard to another Agriculture Today. Well, conditions are prime now for you wheat growers to be watching your crops for the possible outbreak of diseases in those stands around Kansas, given our recent climatic conditions around the state. So we're told by our guest, Erick DeWolf is back with us, wheat disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And this is your crunch time, Erick, when you're interacting with producers, talking about control strategies for diseases. For at this stage of crop development, this is where things really get going disease-wise, right?
It is. We often will see a lot of different diseases. Some of our most damaging diseases, such as stripe rust or leaf rust, get established this time of year, right, as our crops moving from the jointing through the flag leaf emergence and approaching the heading stages of growth. This is prime time for making a lot of final decisions for our wheat disease management.
All right, bring us up to the moment and the latest word on rust diseases. It had been reported from, the Kansas Hard Winter Wheat Tour last week that rust was definitely confirmed in numerous fields in the southern part of the state, and that's where it's residing mostly now?
That is where we're seeing a lot of the activity. South central Kansas is where we've been getting most of the reports, certainly picked up as part of the wheat tour, but we've also been monitoring the situation over the last couple of weeks and seen it go from just a few counties now to many of the counties in south central Kansas have now confirmed leaf rust in many areas, and a smaller fraction of those have also confirmed the presence of stripe rust as well.
With any kind of particular intensity or just the pedestrian appearance of rust?
Well, so I guess at this point, all things considered, I think the good news is that most reports are indicating the disease is at low levels, still very low, and mostly in the low to mid canopy. So these are the leaves that were a few weeks ago were out at the top of the canopy, and now we put on a new layer of leaves or another 2 layers of leaves beyond that. So that's all a reflection of it's taking time for the disease to develop. But as this next generation of the disease, so if we have this fungus reproducing in the lower leaves, it has the potential to move up to these new leaves that are so critical to our yield and productivity of our wheat crop. So these low levels of disease, given some favorable weather, can really increase rapidly and begin to set up the potential for yield loss on those from damage on the upper leaves.
And when you say favorable weather, you mean damp conditions, of which we have considerably.
Yeah, we're for these fungal diseases like stripe rust, leaf rust, we're looking for moderate temperatures between 50 and 70 degrees, and frequent rainfalls, extended periods of high relative humidity. And that's exactly where we've been in most areas of the state over the last couple of weeks. So at this point, I'm anticipating these low levels of rust to increase potentially dramatically and become severe over the next 10 days to 2 weeks.
And the disease is quite likely to move into other fields and other locations in the state, given, again, our wet weather?
I think so. So we continue to get new reports from additional counties, spreading north, spreading west, and I think what we've seen taking place in the South Central, where we've gone from low levels and anticipating more disease, higher populations there. We're likely to see low levels begin to develop in the North Central region and Northwest, and the not-so-distant future as they reach these critical decisions are in growth as well.
So, right to making that decision of whether or not to treat a wheat stand with a fungicide against the rust disease complex, what things do growers need to ponder here?
Well, I think there's a number of different layers to this decision. The first one is going to be related to the growth stage that your wheat's at. So if you are out and you're scouting your wheat variety, you know it's susceptible to stripe rust or leaf rust, and you're already seeing the disease established there, and the weather conditions, like we just saying, look like they're conducive, that I think we need to strongly be considering a fungicide there. So we might back off from that if there's situations where there's low yield potential in a crop. If you have a variety that is resistant and we're not seeing evidence of the disease get established there, those would all be things that might make us be a little more conservative about fungicide use.
One has to watch certain things as label restrictions in as far as timing of the application, do they not?
Well, I think that plays right into the growth stage decision here. As we can be too early, to apply a fungicide now, say at the jointing stage, might be too early because the new growth that comes later when our flag leaves begin to emerge, oftentimes with most our fungicides would not have protection. Remember, these fungicides many of them are systemic in that they are moved inside the plant. Most of them will not move to that new foliage as it emerges. So only the leaves that are out at the time of application will have an effective dose of the fungicide and provide protection. So it's possible to be too early. Turning our attention to the growers in the southeast or south central, they may be getting closer to the heading or even flowering stages of growth. And right around that point is where, as you mentioned, we start to find label restrictions. So it's important to be watching that window potentially closing here and know which product you have and what the restrictions may be. We start to lose products around the heading stages of growth. Some of them will allow applications to go up into the flowering stages of growth and possibly a few days after, but then we just run into pre-harvest intervals or growth stage cutoffs within the pesticide label itself.
Above all, though, the economics of the decision, whether it's worth one's while from the dollars and cents standpoint to actually treat, the cost to returns, if you will.
Well, I think that's one factor that many producers do have on their mind this year is that the profit margin in a lot of wheat is questionable this year just because of the price point for a lot of the grain. So I think for many growers, the decision point is going to start and end there on looking at their yield potential, looking at the potential value of that grain, and can I afford to put more money into this?
Now, there are online tools that will help producers walk through those variables, right?
Yeah, there are. There are some publications that are available through the K-State Research and Extension bookstore, one specifically of evaluating the need for foliar fungicides in wheat, and another one that make product comparisons. That's based on trials that we've done over the years or have been done throughout the U.S. and how these products compare side to side and head-to-head comparisons.
That's a great reference to take advantage of at ksre.ksu.edu. Well, the headline grabbers, the rust diseases, but are there other pathogens out there that producers need to likewise be alert to?
There are some other diseases also on the move as well. One of them that I've seen in some of my own scouting and heard of from reports from consultants and county agents is a disease called septoria leaf blotch or leaf spot, and it's favored by splashing rain. So by no surprise, with all the rainfall we've had, we may well see that one begin to move to these upper leaves here soon as well. So I think that's one, a leaf spotting disease that we also need to keep in mind. When we're managing leaf diseases, it's probably a matter of beginning to see, are we seeing multiple diseases? Evaluating the susceptibility of a variety and where it's at in that canopy. If we're already seeing multiple diseases get established, multiple vulnerabilities, that all elevates the risk of us having major disease problems and potentially increasing the benefit of that fungicide.
The upside is that fungicides will take care of that cross-section of diseases, the foliar diseases, that is.
That's right. Most of the fungicides that are widely marketed in the state are going to have very good, excellent efficacy against the rust diseases and many of these leaf spotting diseases that are the major threats to the crop at this point.
One other thing we wanted to bring up, this is somewhat isolated to a certain part of Kansas, but its damage can be dramatic enough to get the wheat growers' attention, to be sure. That is head blight, and largely in southeast Kansas historically, you say.
Well, historically, there is a disease called Fusarium head blight, or sometimes we call it head scab, and it can be a real problem in areas that tend to have more frequent rainfall right around the heading and flowering stages of growth that historically have a lot of corn in rotation with their wheat as well. The Fusarium head blight will attack the heads directly and ultimately result in low test weights, small white chalky kernels that results not only in low test weights, but it can also result in mycotoxin or fungal toxin contamination of that grain that can result in significant price discounts when the grain is marketed.
This is one disease that the grower needs to go after proactively with a preventative treatment as opposed to thinking about responding to its presence.
That's right. With a disease like Fusarium head blight that begins to infect right at the flowering stages of growth, that's very near the label cutoff for our fungicides. So by the time we start to see symptoms, by the time the disease becomes visibly manifest in our crops, it's already off-label to apply a fungicide, and there's nothing that can be done. So as a result, we often have to make our decision on Fusarium head blight control based on the weather patterns that are occurring during the heading stages of growth and then up to the flowering stages of growth.
And a brief note here, you say, Eric, as opposed to fungicides for leaf diseases. In the case of Fusarium head blight, you say producers need to be more selective about their products.
That's right. Historically, we've looked at fungicides that are in the triazole class of fungicides. So probably the best available things are products such as Persaro, Caramba. Just this year, we've seen a new product called Miravis Ace that's also come onto the market that might be an option as well. And then probably the second tier down would be some of the tebuconazole or foliar type of products that are widely marketed as generics in the state.
Again, K-State Research and Extension has a wealth of information on managing foliar diseases and other common wheat disease problems that turn up at this stage of the production season. So have a look at those. Eric, we appreciate the briefing, as always. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The latest on wheat disease presence in Kansas stands from Research and Extension wheat disease specialist Erick DeWolf on this opening part of Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Once again, the K-State Crops team have earned high awards at the North American Colleges and Teachers of Agriculture Judging Conference recently held at Murray State University in Murray, Kentucky. 6 students participated in 3 events, placing first in both the Crops and Precision Agriculture contest and second in the Knowledge Bowl. With me now is the man who led this team to success, Dr. Kevin Donnelly, coach of the K-State Crops team, as well as a professor of agronomy here at K-State. Kevin, tell us an overview of this contest.
Okay, well, this is our national competition at NACTA, and it actually is a event that encompasses, I think this year they had 16 different contests, so everything from crops to soils to livestock contests to dairy, and so we went this year, our crops team, we took 6 members, and we actually entered 3 contests. We entered the crops competition, the precision ag, and the knowledge bowl, as you indicated, but our primary focus was on the crops contest because that's what these guys are primarily focused on. So we were pleased to be able to take first in that as well as in the precision ag contest. So.
And what can these kids take away from this experience?
On the crop side, this is a very practical competition. We involve 4 parts. One is a plant and seed identification, and that's generally of even little seedling plants that they would see typically in their scouting and agronomic work. We have a lab practical, which is everything from nutrient deficiencies to identifying insects and diseases and reading herbicide labels and making interpretations of problems. And then there's a written exam, multiple choice test over agronomic principles and plant breeding and a whole gamut of things. And then there's a mathematics section, which is calibration mathematics problems that they would typically do. So it's a very practical contest.
Now, with me also 4 members from this year's crop judging team: Luke Ryan from Solomon, Jayden Meyer from Smith Center, Nate Dick from Buhler, and Kaylin Fink from Chapman. Luke, explain your experience on the crop judging team.
The contest just turned out to be really practical, and we do a lot of things in this contest that's different from the fall contest that you can apply directly to what we're going to be doing in the field. So it was really interesting to kind of explore some of that and go deeper into that. And so now we've also learned things that I haven't even learned in class yet. So it's almost a review when we go back to class. So.
Jayden?
For me, I just really kind of what Luke was talking about, really enjoyed the practical aspect of it. I plan to return to the farm someday, and I can see this contest as being really beneficial, especially like the lab practical portion of the contest, just because there's a wide variety, almost anything agronomic related could be in that part of the contest, and so you really have to study a lot for the contest as a whole, and especially that part as far as studying the materials and looking at pictures of things. And I just really enjoy the practicality of the contest.
Now, Kaylin, what about you?
So all of these boys sitting beside me are all from farming backgrounds. I actually did not come from a farm, so I started about 3 years ago just practicing as an alternate for this team, and so I've been practicing for 3 years. And I'd say that the practicality of this contest, just like the boys said, is absolutely phenomenal. We're definitely better off just because of how practical the contest was, and the CCA and the Certified Crop Advisor test that we have to take, way more prepared for that. So I think that this contest was very helpful for our future careers, and really steps us ahead of other students, especially in other colleges too. So it's been a great experience, great ride.
Nate, what about your experience?
So this was actually my 3rd year as well. I did it once at the 2-year level at Atkinson Community College. So yeah, I would back up that it's really practical knowledge in all of the aspects, and I plan to one day have a career as a crop consultant. So a lot of the things on the practical, or the lab practical, really helps you prepare to see what you might see out in the field.
Now, the crop judging team has an impressive history of competing well. How important was it to succeed this year? Luke?
I think it was pretty important, especially coming off the win in the fall team. I know it's been a few years at least since we've won this contest here, so it was pretty great to be able to bring that back to K-State.
Jayden?
Yeah, it was definitely felt like a good win, and we've been working at it all semester, and there's just an incredible amount of time and practice that goes into a contest like this, and to be able to spend all that time working towards a common goal of winning the contest and then being able to actually win the contest, it feels very rewarding.
What about you, Kaylin?
So being on this contest for 3 years, competing as an alternate, I've seen other top teams go out of K-State. Iowa State seems to beat us every time at this contest, and it's disappointing every single time. So the people that I've met and Nate's met along this time, just seeing them beat us every time is so rough. And so this time being able to beat them, even though we are friends with them, was so rewarding. We didn't actually think we won this contest. We were going up there kind of disappointed and at the banquet, and then we heard our names called out loud, and we just couldn't even believe it. We were so happy. I actually cried a little bit. So none of these boys cried, unfortunately. Didn't get to see that, but very fortunate to be able to win this contest and having that opportunity.
Nate, how does it feel bringing this home?
It was pretty rewarding, you know. I started in high school with the crops judging, and that's how it kind of led me to K-State and with the crops team. And so, yeah, I've put a lot of work into it, so it's really rewarding, honestly.
Now, as a coach, what did you take away?
Well, this is a good experience for us. It's always a good travel experience as well. We got to go to Kentucky this year, so we had the opportunity to see some part of the country and some different agricultural practices. That we had to study up on tobacco, and we even studied up on hemp a bit, and there were some hemp questions. They're kind of the leader in the new hemp, industrial hemp effort. So it's always good for us to go somewhere else and learn more about it. We actually have 3 competitions this spring. We had 2 regional competitions. One was our Southern Plains. It was hosted at Hutchinson Community College, and then our central contest that was in Curtis, Nebraska. And so we were able to win both of those, and so that all the more inspired the other teams. So Nebraska and Iowa State were right behind us, and as Kaylin indicated, it was very close. We weren't real sure, so it kind of come down to the last sections. But these guys did good. The key here is having balance, and that's what they had. Nate was our high individual in the COPS competition, and Kaylin was third, and Luke and Jayden were right in behind them. But I think the precision ag is very impressive as well, because that's not something that we really focused a lot on. But you guys show that students with really solid background in agronomy and threw them into a competition in precision agriculture, which is applying those agronomic concepts just on a different scale. And they performed very well in that. Jayden was actually the high individual in the harvesting section, and Nate was high in our planting section, and Luke, he got to do the UAVs and drones, so he was second high in that. So we actually did quite well in that as well. So I was very proud of them being able to win both.
Now looking forward, Luke, how do you perceive you will use this experience in your career or otherwise?
One of the bigger parts that I'll end up using in the field is probably a lot of the identification, which is one of the big parts of the contest. So all these different plants and little seedlings, seeds, bigger plants, everything, that's all going to help when I go out in the field and have to identify these as a crop consultant.
Jayden, what about you?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I plan to return to the farm after graduation. And so I felt like this contest really helped to solidify some of the education and agronomic knowledge I've gained here at K-State of lots of agronomic concepts and terms and practices.
Now, not coming from an ag background, how do you plan to use it?
So everything I've learned at K-State, or not everything, but a lot of it has come straight out of a textbook. So it's been really hard to kind of go from that to a practical standpoint when I haven't actually been around a whole lot of this stuff. But this contest has really helped me be around all of those things, and I can definitely apply that knowledge that I've learned outside of the textbook in my real agronomic career, which I'm very excited to start.
Now, Nate, how do you plan to use this knowledge you've learned?
So yeah, along with the ID and the practical aspect, just to be comfortable with any of the math and the equations that go along with it, to where I don't have to think about it or go look something up for it to just to be second nature to calculate a herbicide problem or a sprayer calibration or irrigation problem. I think that's going to really help me in my future career as a crop consultant.
Kevin, do you have any additional comments about this team or the crop judging program in general?
Well, I think because we have a rich tradition here, probably most of the learning that happens in these events is in trying to make our team. And so we have a lot of students that benefit from this that unfortunately aren't, always at the winner's circle, because it's tough to make our team, especially for this contest. So we started out with about 15, and the 6 that I took were the ones that were, at the top.
Well, Kevin and the crops judging team, congrats on your success this year at the NACDA event. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
That was Kevin Donnelly, crops judging coach, along with members Luke, Ryan, Jayden, Meyer, Nate Dick, and Kaylin Fink, members who participated in this NACDA event this spring. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker, and we'll return with more after the short break over the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Erick Atkinson here. On now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Starting with this week's Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report out of the USDA. And for the week ending this past Sunday, our topsoil moisture supplies in the state 20% surplus, 74% adequate, only 6% short to very short. And the subsoil moisture at 16% surplus, 79% adequate, only 5% short to very short. As for the winter wheat crop condition, as of this past Sunday, 58% good to excellent, 32% fair, 10% poor to very poor. Winter wheat jointing in the state now at 80%. That's somewhat behind the 87% average for the date. And wheat headed at 14%. That's well behind the 41% average for the date. Corn planting, 41% complete, behind the 51% average. And the corn emergence is now at 16%, behind the 23% average. As for soybeans planted, 5%, that's very near the average for the date, and grain sorghum planted at 1%, again right on the average. And cotton planting in Kansas at 4%, once more on the average. And we've the first report of the season on pasture and range conditions in the state, 65% good to excellent, 31% fair, and 4% poor to very poor, according to the USDA. As for the national look at planting progress now, we turn to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Excessive moisture is making fieldwork difficult.
With drenching rains falling from the central and southern plains into the Midwest, we continue to see a very sluggish planting pace for most major crops.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey looks at corn.
Overall planting progress has reached 23%. That is exactly one half the 5-year average of 46%, and now starting to fall behind last year's pace, which picked up in early May. Last year at this time, we had 36%.
States that are dramatically behind schedule include Illinois, Indiana, and South Dakota. Corn emergence is 6% compared to the 5-year average of 13%.
For soybeans, also very sluggish progress. Only 6% of the crop planted by May 5th, less than half of the 5-year average pace of 14%.
He sees the most significant soy planting delays in the Delta states. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The USDA's Farm Service Agency has announced that you dairy producers who had coverage under the Margin Protection Program for dairy are now eligible to receive a repayment for part of the premiums paid into the program. To be eligible for this repayment authorized by the 2018 Farm Bill, a dairy operation must have participated in the MPP dairy during any calendar year from 2014 through 2017, have the repayment calculated and verified by the FSA, and then elect one of two options by this coming September the 20th. Operations whose established production history has been transferred to an heir or a new owner are also eligible. See your local FSA office for more details on this. And that rolls us into the weekly feature for you dairy producers from the Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State, Milk Lines with K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning forage harvest as we begin the forage harvesting season. Some parts of the state, particularly in the southwest, we've already begun to harvest the small grain silages, mostly triticale, but also a little wheat and a little rye also coming in. So just want to remind some of our producers of some of the things we need to be paying attention to as we begin the harvest. One of the first challenges we face is the moisture content of the forage that we're trying to chop. Keep in mind that we would like to make sure that the dry matter content is somewhere between probably about 38 to 40% for these small grain silages. When we get less dry matter than that, we sometimes have issues with cross-stadial fermentation and some negative effects on our livestock. And it's a challenge with the recent rains. We have wet soil, so now it'll take longer for those crops to wilt in the field. That will increase our harvest window, and we are likely to get additional rains as well. So Just keep in mind, if you put it up too wet, you may have some fermentation that you do not like to have in the silo. Second thing to think about is the cut length. Want to make sure that those particles don't exceed about 4 inches in length. If the particles exceed 4 inches in length, we may need to reduce the theoretical cut length on our cutter. If we have longer particle size, that generally means that it will not pack as well in our bunkers or trench silos that we might be putting it in. And speaking of packing, that's another thing that we need to think about. We really like to get a density of about 15 pounds per cubic foot on a dry matter basis or 45 on an as-fed basis. To do that, we need to make sure we have enough tractors and that they each have enough weight to make that happen. Probably need to achieve somewhere around 800 pounds per ton per hour that pressure that we apply. So just simply take the number of tractors that you're running, multiply each of those by the weight that we have, and then the hours that they're going to pack, divide that by the tons that you're delivering per hour. Should come up somewhere around 800 if to have enough weight to adequately pack to get enough density. Probably have already purchased your inoculant. At least I hope you've purchased your inoculant. So on these small grain silages, using a homo fermenter or something that's going to increase the amount of lactic acid in the silage mass is very important. Keeping in mind that we need the lactic acid to lower the pH to an acceptable level so it'll store well for us as well as feed well. And then lastly, don't forget you need to cover your bunker silos or your drive-over piles if that's the storage form that you're using. Keeping in mind that oxygen barriers do reduce losses, so using 2 covers, one on oxygen barrier underneath a stronger sheet of plastic is very well advised. Also, you need to make sure you have enough weight on top of that plastic. Tires that touch on either side are probably the best method to make sure that we've got enough downward pressure on that plastic so that it does not billow in the wind. Also, making sure that we get that cover on within 24 hours after completing the pile. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Many thanks, Mike, as always. Interest in our podcast service continues to grow swiftly, and you can take advantage of that as well. It all happens at agtoday.net. You can listen to our daily broadcast posting right there at that site. Or if you'd like, you can tap the subscribe button there, and the brand new episodes of our program will automatically arrive on your mobile device every weekday. It's as simple as going to agtoday.net. Next up, our weekly visit with K-State wildlife specialist Charlie Lee, here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
This Agriculture Today concludes, as we typically do on a Tuesday, with our weekly look at wildlife management, featuring wildlife specialist Charlie Lee of K-State Research and Extension. Charlie, you have in hand this week a new report on prairie dogs and their influence on forage resources. Before we dig into the details of this work, this is a subject that often has been studied in the past, right?
Yes, we've known about prairie dog livestock interface and their grazing impacts for many years. We know that most of our grazing lands in the western United States have evolved under grazing and browsing pressure from a wide assortment of animals that included bison, elk, deer, pronghorn, as well as some of the small mammals like prairie dogs and ground squirrels that may be found in those locations. Now that we've replaced some of those native grazers with domestic livestock, we still have the small mammals in those locations and still cause controversy on whose forages it is to graze. Is it the native mammals or is it forage that's available for domestic livestock production? So historically, that's been viewed as competition We know that there's been a high dietary overlap, greater than 75 to 85% overlap between prairie dogs and domestic livestock. There are also other studies that show, yes, they may be competitors, but the forage that is left behind after prairie dogs have grazed on it has a higher nutritive value. When you look at what prairie dogs do in rangeland, you can see that they keep it grazed shorter. They clip not only to consume food, but to reduce vegetative height so that they're more able to see predators. That constant grazing keeps the plants shorter and allows new leaves to develop. Those new leaves then have a higher crude protein content and are more highly digestible. So people say it's a wash between less forage available and higher quality forage. Yes, there's probably some trade-off there between the competition for forage and the improvement in digestibility and forage quality, but prairie dogs often keep it grazed so short that it's not available for livestock. Well, this particular study, which was done in northeastern Wyoming, come up with some different results. They did a very well-developed study that compared forage values and biomass on several locations in Thunder Basin National Grassland in northeastern Wyoming. That particular area would be considered a grazed northern prairie shrubland ecotone, somewhat different species of grass, more cool season grasses than what we would find in Kansas. Particularly western wheatgrass would be found there more frequently, and more shrubs. So we would have more woody material and some similar species of grasses, but certainly more dominated by cool season species.
The objective of this study, though, was to basically get at the same question, the impact of forage quality and availability with the presence of prairie dogs.
Yeah, it was pretty simple. They wanted to determine how the forage quality differed between prairie dog colonies and sites without prairie dog colonies. So they clipped peak standing biomass at each monitoring station according to the peak plant maturity during subsequent years. The study was conducted in 2015, 16, and also in the early part of 2017. Then they used near-infrared reflectance spectrometry, or NIRS, to evaluate forage quality factors, which would be protein and energy and fat. They also looked at digestibility, or acid detergent fiber, and then also minerals. So it was a good approach. It just seemed the results were a little bit unusual for what I would normally have had expected.
And outline those if you would. In essence, they're saying that the impact on those forage resources from prairie dog activity was minimal?
Yeah, I think they determined that they actually were a benefit. The above-ground herbaceous biomass, as they said, did not differ between prairie dog colonies and sites without prairie dogs. So that tells me that perhaps the grazing pressure on those sites was so light that the additional grazing done by prairie dogs was not statistically detectable. Most colonies that I've seen, when they're stocked by domestic livestock at a kind of a normal stocking rate, when you add prairie dogs to the equation, then you see something that occurs in overgrazing. But this particular study said the biomass did not differ. They also said that the crude protein was 1.4 times higher on the prairie dog colonies than it was off. They also said that the total digestible nutrients was 1.1 times higher on prairie dog colonies than on sites without. Fat content was 1.3 times higher on prairie dog colonies. So when you look at all of those qualities that have been improved, as well as no difference in the biomass, prairie dogs do not have a significant impact on domestic livestock production, at least as a result of this particular study.
So does this serve to confuse the issue even more, Charlie?
Well, I think it confuses the issue more. Perhaps it's done in a little different area where most of the other studies had been determined. But I think they also keep in mind that perhaps grazing pressure is something that needs to be looked at. The amount of grazing animals certainly is going to play a role. This was done in seasons that were perhaps wetter than normal. And I think, again, when you have more precipitation, lower stalking rates, you're going to have a less discernible difference between colonies with prairie dogs and colonies without. It does show that prairie dogs have the ability to improve forage quality, and as long as there is enough forage remaining that livestock have access to that, you would expect livestock production to be increased on those areas.
Well, it's an interesting new take on the question of just what sort of influences prairie dogs have on those forages out there, and this is a study just recently released out of the state of Wyoming. We appreciate the overview of this, Charlie. Many thanks. Charlie Lee with us, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Our time's away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Erick Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.